This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Buck Melton. Thank you for being here once again, Buck.
Always happy to be here.
We've had lots of conversations. Well, I'm not going to make any jokes about the president's right now.
We don't want jokes.
I'm all right.
We want
Okay.
action.
I'm not going to make any comments.
This is
about
your year. But
I'm not going to make any comments about the choices the American people
folks
confront.
call, right. We still have a chance.
The choices are sort of limited, aren't they?
That's it.
I would say that's a little disappointing. Well, in any event, tonight we've talked about many things. Let us talk tonight about honor and shame. And I think many times what happens are these words, these concepts become very, very powerful in understanding what they do and don't mean, and the power of the words are of consequence. And to me, if you read anything from centuries gone by and you pick the time that honor is used, I mean, your honor is there. The honor is a concept that it's almost an antediluvian kind of word,
Yes.
in that now it's rare that people would discuss their honor as if they don't have any anymore. It's been rare that a person, patients, people, that they really think of honor. The Marine hymn, I mean, we keep our nation's honor clean.
Yes.
I can think of one example. And in the past, a person that their honor was of enormous consequence. And in some countries, the honor is huge. I mean, there are honor
Yes.
killings in Middle Eastern
Yes.
countries. And what exactly is that? What is honor?
Well, it's one of these things that's hard to define, but essentially a sense of social expectations and social norms, not just what society holds you to, but what you yourself hold yourself to. The knowledge that this is what is expected of me, this is what is expected of someone in my station, and were I not to live up to it, even if no one else knew it, I would know that I was not living up to it, and that that makes me somewhat less of a person. So it's a matter of self-policing, if you will, not legally, but socially and self-policing.
Well, just I think one of the things that interests me about the word is that it's kind of a checks and balances against the power of the state.
Yes.
So I mean, I'm trying to think: can you, in a really totalitarian world, can a person have a sense of honor? And in other words, some personal standards that go against whatever the state says to do, or the actions that are required. And many times the state they're like puppeteers. They're sort of moving people to this, do that, do this, do that. But honors are quite rigid kind of thing, and it puts a check, in some ways, at least in some circumstances,
Yes.
on the power of the state or any external agency.
Yes. Well, it would be either the individual versus the state, or at least some community versus the state that is probably either set itself up in opposition or is in opposition somehow, that you feel a greater allegiance perhaps to your ethnic group within the state as opposed to the state itself. But yeah, I think it does rest with the individual, and I think I've brought this up before. The difference between a civil libertarian system in which honor could flourish and a statist system is the difference between saying on the first hand, I will or will not do this, whereas in a statist system, the statement is you will or will not do that.
So the state, and the state can manipulate honor, can it not? I mean, just thinking about how the Nazis made use of that.
Yes.
So presumably in the German officer class, and we get into the idea that honor can be associated with status. So in other words, to be able to duel, I mean, you had a certain kind of social class in order to offer a challenge.
Correct.
If you were too low of a dog,
Yes.
then you'd be laughed off. I'm not going to associate with you.
Yes.
You cannot you don't possess honor.
A gentleman only duels with other gentlemen.
Right. So in some ways it was a sign of caste and superior social standing. And
Yes.
if one lost one's honor, then it became déclassé. I mean, and that's
Yes.
so
You're socially ruined.
that's right. And so the idea, I mean, there's certain classes of people have this notion of honor, which in some ways is a higher expectation for their behavior.
Yes.
So a gentleman doesn't lie, cheat, or lie, cheat, or cheat.
Or,
Right. That's
yeah,
all right. Three
cheat
things.
or steal, or tolerate those who does.
I think, yeah, that's West Point.
Yes.
Maybe the University of Virginia too. And many places
Yes.
are like that. The honor code. So one of the things is that, just to bring into the sense of honor, is that at least the University of Virginia is one place, and there are many others, where the purpose of the university, or one purpose, is that only honorable people could attend the place. And that would mean that a person of only a certain kind of class could do that, and it might not be necessarily a financial class, but at least a sense of personal worth. You
Yes.
couldn't be there if you didn't have a sense of personal worth that meant that your behavior would
Yes.
be superior to those of lower conditions.
Yes. Although, I suppose it could be that. It could be class-based. It could be socioeconomic class. But I don't think there's anything inherent in the idea of honor that prevents a sort of social mobility, if you will,
Yes.
of someone developing for himself and holding himself out to be a person of honor.
Yes, that's right,
So-
and I'll accept that. And
Yes.
so the idea is that the sine qua non of, I don't know, being a gentleman is a notion of honor. So does that mean, what I'm getting into is the fact the word is no longer around or not used too frequently, that sense of, I guess, a gentleman or a lady is sort of become not something that's a contemporary consideration. And in looking at the universities, one of the things that's impressive is the idea that the honor codes around the country have been so diminished. It's not necessarily, I mean, it exists, but the social force behind those codes are not as powerful as
Yes.
they used to be.
Yes. Well, I and I'm sure you and, for instance, my wife Carol have all been at institutions of higher learning, both as students and as teachers, where there was an honor code, and we have been at institutions where there was not. And Carol and I have talked about it a good bit, and she points out one problem we are dealing with today, and I want to say this very carefully so I'm not misunderstood, with students is an honor code does not work when students do not understand the concept of honor. And by that, she, and certainly I, don't mean that all of our students today are dishonorable people or bad people.
Yes.
You know, many of our students are very good people, but as you say, they have not studied or been taught the concept of honor, and therefore it's alien to them and may not serve as a check on their behavior, not in the formal way that we're discussing tonight.
Yes. So, I mean, what I'm getting into is how useful honor is. It's a pretty good thing. It often has its origins in, I would say, religious systems.
Yes.
So the idea is that you have something that's an ethical system that is independent of the power of the state, and also gives you a certain, at least, status. And then the idea is that people that run the place have to subscribe to this moral system,
Yes.
and that you wouldn't really be you would not associate with anyone that did not. The door is locked. You can't enter the room unless you have a sense of honor.
Yes.
You can't be an officer. You can't
Correct.
be an officer and a gentleman.
Yes.
You just can't. You can't run anything
Yes.
unless your moral code is a superior moral code.
Yes.
And which is a concept. That's a powerful concept, and one that's under enormous assault, I would
Yes.
say.
I would say, I'd qualify what you say to one degree. If you're dealing with the academy, schools where there are honor codes, and especially the service academies, I do think there that honor does acquire at least a quasi-legal status. That our good mutual friend Chicks Miller,
Yes,
as a West
sure,
Point
sure.
graduate, has pointed out that if the instructor during the exam says pens down, and you do not immediately put your writing implement down,
Right.
there is official sanction for that.
Sure.
But yes, your point is taken that it's usually something other than the state, and it's I would say that it comes from three places, and they are interlinked. Number
Yes.
one, the expectations of the community, not really legally enforceable, but expectations. They could slam their doors in your face if you
Yes,
showed yourself to be
yes.
dishonorable. Secondly, your own sense of self-worth or your sense of position in society.
Yes.
And thirdly, the concept of God, that even if no one else knows that you have cheated, God, who sees everything, knows that you've cheated, and you will be held to account for that.
Yes. Now, where I'm selling the ship in a little ways is that many people would say that, okay, these are this is sort of like the code duality. The other point is slightly about
duals,
this
very much
duals.
a part of it. Yes.
So the idea is that, in other words, it's also kind of a masculine thing. So they had the masculine and a feminine honor, and these honor codes are present in other countries around the world. They often these tragedies.
Common denominators.
That's right, and so there could be some kind of universality to this notion of honor.
Yes.
In instances, this notion of overwhelming honor causes tragedies. The code duello, and also it had a masculine component to it, did it not?
Yes.
I mean, you were going to have a duel, and it required a certain
testosterone-driven. Yes.
It required a certain physical vigor. I mean, you could go into the whole idea that, okay, now we no longer have the code duello. We don't deal. The honor is not there, and if you were to be insulted or whatever, you would go to the law courts, which is hardly the same thing, isn't it?
Yes. Well, we could take this in a couple of directions. There are duels that take place today that rival gangs, the rivalry they feel for each other. West Side Story is probably a trite example,
right.
But you know, there are honor killings in other places in the world. So the fact that the formal duel that we think of that came out of the French court,
yes,
that's not so obvious anymore. Perhaps it might be a good idea to bring it back. It might serve as some sort of safety.
Well, you know, you've touched on something that's interesting to me. We're getting into the idea of universality, a little bit of honor, and then I've neglected to think of that, Bucky. But actually, it appears to me that many of the drug gangs and the gang killings that take place, the one gang is against the other. That there's some, and this I think you could say in prison gangs, there's a certain kind of honor.
Yes.
Somebody did something, whatever. I mean, they violated some kind of, I guess,
expectations.
You're not supposed to come to this part of the prison yard, or you've insulted us, so we're going to have to just kill you because you violated this. Our honor requires that, and if we did not do that, then we would lose, I guess, our place at the table. We would not be in the world of sharp elbows. The kith and kin of this gang would be marginalized.
Yes.
They wouldn't have access. They would be crushed in a way by the world, and so it's a protective kind of masculine thing that happens in some circumstances. So we're really bouncing this basketball quite a bit, are we not?
Yes. But I think it is very testosterone-driven behavior to show that you are better, that you are stronger. Perhaps it involves mating behavior. You're showing off for the women folk that you are better breeding stock.
Right. So maybe maybe if you get into this, I get into this universality, and then the fact that in the contemporary world, it seems to be less of a powerful thing as it is in past years. Maybe because it's somewhat more irreligious, but maybe another reason is the law courts have restricted a notion of honor. So if you, I don't know what, if your wife was insulted and you smashed somebody's head in after that or whatever, then you would be wound up in jail. I mean, and the other thing is the notion of this superior moral demeanor.
Yes.
Doesn't go anywhere in the legal world, does it? I mean, any comments about that? It's just lost.
And there used to be a bit, but I'll mention that in just a second. I would say that one definition of the state is that the state is the only entity in a society that can have claim to the legitimate use of violence or legitimate use of force. Now, that's a bit of a weasel definition because, for instance, if you came at me swinging a baseball bat, I certainly have the right under the law to defend myself with force. But I think the state would say the only reason I can do that is because the state is authorizing self-defense.
Yes, yes.
But there was a time, as I was saying, that as juries were first coming to be used during the Middle Ages in the common law system, the jury was, the first jury was actually not designed to hear and to weigh the evidence. The purpose of the jury, the compurgators as they were called, were to come swear an oath. If you were on trial for breaching the peace or committing murder or something, the jury would be members of your community who personally knew you. Compare that to the impartial jury today. And they knew your reputation, and they were willing to swear an oath before the judge and before God that you were a good person.
Yes.
That was their purpose.
Right.
And we've gotten away from that now.
Yes, yes.
The court doesn't care. Yes, you are supposed to swear or affirm that you're to tell the truth.
Yes.
But I doubt that any good litigator or judge is going to place a lot of reliance on that. Again, we could talk to one of our judicial friends who sit on the bench for that. But they really rely mainly on opposing counsel's cross-examination to catch you in a lie.
Yes.
So not the fact that you're bound to tell the truth.
But, I'm just thinking about, just our contemporary world where we have less honor, for me, at least in America, maybe I'm overstating that, but less honor than in past generations, whatever, and more law. And along with that, the sense of, trust is less. The other point that's out there is let the buyer beware kind of issue in the marketplace.
Yes.
So if you're to use this analogy, you're a landowner, you're the nobleman, you come into the market town, and you normally would expect the price to be what would be fair.
Yes.
And that no one would have an unreasonable price. So I'm going to take a penny's profit on this, and that's what it costs. It's a penny for me, and I'm charging $1. Yes. And that's the deal here. I get a penny, and that's the fair price. And but if somebody says, "Well, look, I'm really going to make a dime on this," and so capitalism would say that would be fine. And there's sort of a clash in a way of the marketplace and these traditional sources of honor, as witnessed by the fact, and some religions will say the Islamic faith, the notion of interest is a bit inherent. They have to sort of work around that, and in Christianity it was that way too.
The medieval church and usurious charges, yes.
So the marketplace could be something that would, in some ways, be against honor.
Well, I think you could see it one way or the other. The Puritan ideal, for instance, and with the Puritans, you're dealing with a very homogeneous society. The idea of the fair price, but generally speaking, as the marketplace and as capitalism developed, and you see huge strides in the development of capitalism, especially after Adam Smith comes along, the idea of the arm's length transaction, that interestingly enough, the courts aren't going to get involved in that. It's called the peppercorn theory. If you want to sell me your brand new Rolls Royce for a peppercorn, and it's clear that there's no duress here, there's no drunkenness or reduced capacity. If you want to sell me that Rolls for peppercorn, the courts are not going to interfere in that contract. So,
but now is one word we've talked about words. One is honor. Another one is gouging. So, if particularly when the price of gasoline goes up, I haven't heard it's down recently. I haven't heard anyone make any non-gouging or whatever. But this is a common kind of idea is that it's not honorable to do that. So you say, well, look, I'm making too much money on this deal. I'm going to have to lower the price, or I'm selling you this piece of property, and a widow comes in, and you say, well, I'm going to sell it to you for $100,000. It's only worth $50,000, but the widow's not too knowledgeable on this, and it's not overt fraud. It's kind of this not quite the sea or the land. It's kind of where capitalism often flourishes.
Yes.
Where there's not a clear idea about what's up, and you've got the ability to really to profit substantially from another person's naivete.
Yes. Well, I think those are two different things. I would class gouging. I think this is a fairly accurate idea is a situation in which the gougee is really has no choice.
Yes.
And the concept of the unconscionable contract, for instance, is one in which there is a gross inequality of bargaining power. I've got gasoline, you want it, I've got plenty of customers, you've got to buy gasoline to get to your appointment. And also that I'm pretty naughty about my bargaining. I actually say, well, gee, I'm only down to 100 gallons now when I've got 10,000 gallons.
Yes, right.
Yeah, the courts are going to take a dim view of that. Whereas taking advantage of the widow who just doesn't know a whole lot, that's a harder situation. A lot of times the courts are going to say, well, it's her job to find out. Now, what if she can't? What if she is of limited mental ability, or she's blind? You may have a different situation there. But once again, if you're taking advantage of a blind old widow, is that an honorable thing to do?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time left, but I guess the polar opposite of honor is shame.
Yes.
And so the idea is, well, you've done some shameful act, and you're to be, I guess, avoided, scorned.
Yes.
And shame, it seems to be out there more than honor. I mean, people are scorned. I don't think many people tout their honorability, but people could say that's shameful, or they would sort of think, isn't that just terrible, whatever that
Yes.
person's behavior. Any comments about that?
Well, and there are things, I think there are different types of shame. Shame is the negation of honor. If I realize as a gentleman, as a person of honor, that I have deliberately failed to live up to that, or negligently failed to live up to that, then I justly feel this sense of shame. And once again, it can be imposed by my social group, by my class. It can be imposed by self. It could probably be imposed by God. I think there's a relation between shame and guilt. But on the other hand, there's also a false shaming that an example would be, I think it was Huey Long, the kingfish, the man who ruled Louisiana with an iron fist. He would, the story goes, claim that his political opponents were thespians and heterosexuals.
That sounds bad.
Shaming, it's a false sense of shame.
Yes.
That public shaming of someone who really objectively need not feel shame for the positions he's taken.
Yes.
So I think that's the sort of shame that we're seeing run amok today. That a society comes up with a social standard and gangs up on a holdout to
Yes.
try to force him into that standard.
Yes. Maybe someone that resisted, I don't know,
Political correctness.
or gay rights or something. I don't know. The baker that would not sell the wedding cake to the gay people getting married. Well, it's a shameful thing you did that.
Well,
Yes.
this is a very big one that there are very strong religious injunctions against homosexuality that go literally thousands of years back, and rightly or wrongly, they cannot be easily displaced, and I would say, once again, rightly or wrongly, they have a legitimate claim under the First Amendment. Remember, the First Amendment is not there to make us feel good. The First
Yes.
Amendment is to protect unpopular things.
Yes.
And as we speak right now, the Georgia General Assembly has passed a law saying that if you have a good faith, sincere religious belief as a pastor that homosexuality is a sin, you may not be forced to preside over a homosexual marriage.
Yes. Yes.
And there's going to be a big slugfest out of this because we've got two different communities coming from two radically different
Yes,
positions
yes.
here. There will be shaming, I'm afraid, on both sides.
Well, you can shame someone, and then a person has an internal sense of shame.
Yes.
And I guess one thing is the Japanese military commanders, if they lost the war, they would or battle, they had not lived up to their honorable obligations, they would commit hara-kiri, just kill themselves, and then that would remove the shame. Their honor would be preserved.
Yes. The better term is seppuku.
Seppuku.
Yes,
Oh, really?
seppuku. And
Well,
this is,
so I used the wrong term there.
well, yeah, harakiri is, I think, a more colloquial base kind of way of putting it.
So a more aristocratic way is
Seppuku.
Okay. Right.
Yes, once again, kamikaze is a bad translation.
Define
It
when.
should be shinpu. So
Well, you have some knowledge of Japanese, it
tiny
appears,
bit,
a little
tiny
bit,
bit,
yes.
more of the culture than of the language.
Okay.
And that even is limited.
Yes, good.
But consider this: it would be cowardly for a West Pointer to kill himself in the face of being taken prisoner or losing a battle.
Yes.
It would be cowardly and against Bushido for the samurai to be taken captive, for him not to kill himself.
Yes, yes.
Opposite actions, similar result.
Right. Although the West Point guy could well sort of just take one with him, as he said, and take the gun and not surrender.
Yes, or throw himself on a hand grenade.
Right.
Very
or
honorable.
we'll never surrender kind of viewpoint. I mean, so it's a complicated kind of thing. Probably not surrendering would preserve one's honor a little better, but it's more complicated. You've got the men under you. Maybe you're all going to die there.
And you have the opportunity to get free and to fight again.
Right, that's right. It's a complicated story there.
Yes.
Well, we have a lot of issues on honor and shame. The one thing that seems to be there, it's something that is independent of law in a way, and it requires moral relationships.
Yes.
And so is there, just to go through this, sometimes you've heard it said, well, this person is shameless. So if you don't have any particular, people might attempt to shame you, but in order to do that, you have to have a sense of, I guess, response to community opinion and some kind of internal, gyroscope.
Yes,
about your moral relationships with other people.
Well, you've probably had to make a conscious decision to become an island unto yourself, or perhaps suffer from some sort of psychopathy that you simply can't empathize enough with members of the community, whether that be the community of gentlemen or the human community or even the living community if you're abusing an animal.
Yes.
If your brain is not able to do these things.
Well, you can be sociopathic, and so there are personalities that are just these notions are alien to them. So it's impossible to have a sense of honor or of shame, and they have some kind of advantage in a way.
Yes.
At least an initial one. I think there's a big debate about that, about whether you're if you're sort of altruistic in a way, and you're trying to like help your fellow creature, or you're just totally trying to do things for yourself without any kind of restraint or ability to have a notion of honor or of shame, then I think the story is you get some initial advantages in doing that, but after a while, your fellow creatures discover
they get
this,
wise to it,
and you sort of go down.
It's crying wolf sort of thing. Well, our mutual friend Jamie Cockfield, professor of history at Mercer, and I hope he's watching this, but one of the best lessons that I ever learned in college, I learned from him my very first semester as a freshman. He said, never get into a fight with anyone whose morals are lower than yours, which would certainly be a sociopath or a psychopath, even if they didn't know their morals were low.
Yes, yes.
Because they will freely engage in behavior that someone without their affliction would consider to be shameful or dishonorable.
Now, does that give them some advantages?
It gives them, as you say, immediate tactical advantages in the long run, perhaps. Perhaps if they keep moving, if they go to other communities, if they find new marks.
Right.
So what do you do?
You know, I think of Hitler in a way. I mean, the great archdemon of whatever.
And the author of the Big Lie.
Well, his whole way that he did things. I mean, you could say that at Munich, or he's doing these negotiations and he's talking to gentlemen on the other side of the table. They're gentlemen.
Yes.
And so they're assuming the person they're talking with is also a gentleman, though. They're a little suspicious, but they never so well, this guy must observe the code of honor.
That's certainly part of it.
And then when he doesn't, I mean, they finally
they're shocked. Yes.
And he just continually overplays his hand, and and in the end, he loses. He loses. The world loses, but he personally loses, and then he kills himself. Sort of in a way. Was his honor preserved by killing himself, or did he have any honor?
I would say, even in his own mind, I don't think it would have been an honorable act. He had decided that the German people had failed to live up to his standards, and he was not going to be around to provide a spectacle for the victors. So
So
that's the coward's way out.
So it was a
Yes.
little different. It was a little different.
Okay.
Well, all right. On that comment, we had a really interesting interchange.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
sir.
so much for being here tonight.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.